Hey everyone, it's Alice. Welcome back to another GRE video. Thank you so much for being here today. So today we're going to be doing another essay review. This one is actually going to be my first analyze an issue essay review. I haven't done these on a video yet, but if you're interested in having me review one of your videos, I am offering private tutoring, and you can get one 25-minute session for free if you go to the pinned comment down below and sign up for it. So let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing I want to do here is look at the prompt because we want to understand that before we read anything else. So here it says, a nation should require all of its students to study the same national curriculum until they enter college. So this is the question that you want to be thinking about, churning in your head before you do any writing. Anytime you're talking about education, you can start thinking about things like time, so time for students, what students are going to be interested in, what society or the nation is going to be interested in, whether it's important for them to have a generalized body of knowledge such as history and science and social studies and things like that, or if that actually is not that important. So here I also want to point out the fact that it says a national curriculum until they enter college. So that is one part of the prompt here that you could take and put a little bit of nuance onto. So generally in the US, if you are from here, you know that we require a generalized national curriculum, but if you go to a typical college, they will also require you to take a certain set of core classes, and this typically has to do with accreditation, but you can go to other types of schools such as trade schools where you don't actually have to do that. So you may say that the nation should require the same national curriculum until high school or even all the way through college like it is typically done right now. So as we go through that, we also want to think about the actual question itself. So most of the time, the question is going to be very, very similar. Write a response in which you discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the recommendation and explain your reasoning for the position that you take. So it's not necessarily that you're going to agree or disagree. You can say, I agree somewhat, I agree a little bit, I strongly agree, and or you can add a little bit of nuance. So I very much agree that they should do this, but all the way until college. Or I very much agree, but only until middle school. Something along the like. And then you have the second question, which is, in developing and supporting your position, describe specific circumstances in which adopting the recommendation would or would not be advantageous, and explain how these examples shape your position. So you really want to think about advantages and using examples. So let's look at the introduction. By the way, this essay is from one of my students, so thank you to him for letting me review this so that all of you can learn from his mistakes. And the introduction says, should a nation require all of its students to study the same national curriculum until they enter college? Some people may say yes, because a national curriculum will make school fairer because everybody is going to have to learn the same material. However, I believe a nation should not force all of its students to learn the same national curriculum until they enter college for a few reasons. So here, first of all, the first sentence of the introduction is a rhetorical question. In general, I would not recommend that you use any type of rhetorical questions in essay writing because essays and writing are really not meant for questions, they're really meant for statements. So You also want to look at the last sentence here where he says, for a few reasons. I typically like to list out those actual reasons because they help me personally stay on track and make sure that I am using a lot of logic and reasoning as I write. It also really helps to set up the reader as they read to understand exactly what they're going to see when they start going to your body paragraphs. So you can also see here that he has 2 typos, which is not good. In general, if you've got just, 2 typos or even 1 typo per paragraph, not a huge problem. People know that you are in a time crunch and you also don't have spell check. However, if you are having a lot more typos than that, as you will see as we go through this, that will become a big problem and it will impact your score. So now, here the test taker also starts to talk about the opposition. So some people may say yes because a national curriculum will make school fairer. However, there's no purpose in addressing the opposite side. Why in your essay saying that a national curriculum is not good? Why are you talking about the opposite side? Like, even if there is a point to it, you don't want to say that in the introduction paragraph. That really doesn't make any sense. Again, the essay is not about that, so you don't want to have that in there unless it is very specific. So that doesn't mean don't talk about the other side at all, because obviously you want to refute the other side. But here, don't talk about it in the introduction, particularly if you're not going to explain it and really quash it down. So with that, let's move on to the next paragraph. Let me scroll down. You can see anything that is highlighted, anything that is in red is something that I have left in. So let's read it. To begin with, everyone is not the same. Some people learn faster than others. For example, the child genius who finishes the whole curriculum in 9th grade will not have any challenging material to learn in school anymore. He or she may have to wait until they are of age to go to college to continue learning. Children who have talents in certain areas may also have problems with the standard curriculum. For example, someone who is a math genius and really wants to learn advanced math will be forced to take classes that are going to be a waste of time for them instead of learning something they are good at and want to learn. I think we should guide children toward their gifts and talents. That way, by being able to choose their own curriculum and tailor it to their personalities, then society will be better. On the other hand, some people may say everyone should learn to read, write, and do basic math, which I agree with. That said, these things are all learned by the end of middle school at the latest, so I do not think high school students need to go through the same curriculum. So there are a few recommendations that I made for this paragraph. You may notice that there are 2 examples. However, both of them are pretty weak. The reason I say that is because the reasoning behind them isn't that solid. If we look at this first example about the child genius, for example, if they finish the whole curriculum in 9th grade, typically this is not possible because they have to take certain classes all the way throughout high school. And they may not have any challenging material to learn in school anymore. That part is possible, but they may have to wait until they are of age to go to college to continue learning. Honestly, there is nothing saying that you cannot go to college unless you are of a certain age. We hear all the time about students who are 14 or 12 or even 10 years old who are starting their schooling at a university. It's really not about age here, and it's not about finishing the curriculum. The point about being challenged is actually not a terrible one because being challenged certainly is an issue, but the way that this test taker has said it makes this a very weak example. We can also look at the second example about a math genius. So if you look at it, this is actually exactly the same example as the first one. So we have a child genius who finishes early, but we also have a math genius who wants to learn advanced math because they have also finished early. So this is a problem because it's repetitive. It kind of shows that there's not a lot of strong logic. So you really want to try to avoid something like this. For the most part, unless your examples are very different, one example per paragraph is more than enough. You also want to make your example very strong. So it has to illustrate your point completely. If you're talking about somebody learning faster than others, then stick to the point that somebody is learning faster than others and that they need more information or different information to make sure that they're challenged. It's not really about the time, it's not really about the age. If you want to know more about writing effective examples, coming up with them, and making sure that they are very clear, check the top corner here for my videos about examples. I have a few. Now, chronologically in this paragraph, I want to highlight the sentence that I have in yellow, which is a sentence that I added in. So the reason I added this in was that this writer, he put in his examples, but then didn't tie it back to the actual prompt itself. The prompt, if you'll remember, talks about whether a nation should implement a national curriculum. So this is really talking about a nation and whether or not society and that nation will be better off if they have this or if they don't. So for that reason, I think at least one sentence about national curricula in high school and even in college. What is the reasoning there? And should it be that way? What he is pointing out here is a fact that people do learn reading, writing, and basic math by, let's say, 8th grade, which is when you finish middle school. But is that enough? How does that point that people will finish all of that by middle school relate to his point here that some people learn faster than others? So there are two problems with this refute. Number one is that he doesn't make clear exactly what the reasoning is. People learn a lot of skills up until they finish middle school, but is that enough? And also, what does that have to do with the point he's trying to make here, which is that some people learn faster than others? Those things are not related, and so if you're going to try to refute this type of point, then it should be its own separate paragraph. Typically after the rest of your body paragraphs where you're making your own arguments. So with that, let's go on to the next paragraph. So this paragraph, I will be honest, is also a bit weak. So it says, second, this will lead to burnout in teachers, which will affect students and nations somehow. Notice in red, I added that in. One of the many things that can lead to burnout in a career is lack of autonomy. If teachers are forced to teach a certain curriculum and are not allowed to get away from it even a little bit, this will lead to higher burnout rate. In the US, this will lead to bad results because the US already has a teacher shortage. So, therefore, this may destroy our K-12 educational system. Therefore, no matter how good the curriculum is, if it leads to even a small amount of burnout, it is not worth it, because it does not matter how good the curriculum is if no one is teaching it. I have here in notes worse educational outcomes, larger classes, and motivated teachers, and I'll get to that. The first major point that we have here is that this point does not relate to the prompt. On the surface, you may think, what are you talking about, Alice? Of course it does. You know, we're talking about a national curriculum and we're talking about teachers. Well, sort of. This paragraph is mainly, almost entirely about teachers and about teacher burnout. But it is not tied back to students and it is not tied back to nations, which is what the prompt actually is. So here, instead of saying that this will lead to burnout in teachers, I don't care. Not necessarily because teacher burnout is not a problem, it is a very serious problem, but I don't understand why that's a problem given that we are worried about nations and about a nation's students. So here we really need to tie it back to the prompt. My suggestion would be to scrap this entirely and try another reasoning. But if you're in the zone and you honestly have no more ideas, the best way to go is to make sure that your paragraph ties very explicitly to students and very explicitly to nations and society. You can also see, as I mentioned before, that there are a ton of typos here, which is really bad. I'm not saying that this writer is a bad writer or a bad test taker or a bad student, but this is a very significant problem that needs to be addressed too. In this case, if you're worried about typos, you need to make sure to leave at least a few minutes at the end to go back and look at everything. It's better to not write a conclusion than to leave all of these typos and use that time to correct all of those typos instead. So if we ignore those larger problems, we can look a little bit at the reasoning that our test taker uses here. So he says that if teachers are forced to teach a certain curriculum and are not allowed to get away from it even a little bit, this will lead to a higher burnout rate. So this would definitely be true, but we have no idea if teachers are not allowed to get away from the certain curriculum even a little bit. In general, teachers do have autonomy. They can pick their own assignments, they can pick a textbook, they can figure out, how they want to teach it, how they want to organize everything. So this really is not a very strong argument. If he instead said that even that type of flexibility is not enough, that would be much stronger. There's no evidence in our general understanding that teachers must do exactly XYZ or that there are specific words that they must say while they're teaching certain subjects. The last sentence that he has here, talking about how good the curriculum is, that also doesn't matter because we're also assuming that teachers teach the same thing year after year, but it's definitely possible that they mix it up in a variety of ways, including some teachers, specifically if they are at the lower level, can move between grades or move between subjects relatively easily. In this case, this argument totally doesn't hold any water. Those things are not necessarily super important to address, but given some of the flaws of this argument, I think it is useful to keep in mind just because you might be thinking about some other point that you can make instead. I want to also address the words in red at the very bottom with worse educational outcomes, larger classes, unmotivated teachers, usually motivating students, and they can definitely choose their professor or major if they meet a really great teacher. These are things that this test taker could have pointed out to link this issue of burnout in teachers affecting students, and then that in turn affecting nations. Now, moving on to the conclusion here. In conclusion, some people may say a required national curriculum would be good because it will lead to everyone getting the same education, but if there is not enough teachers to teach the information, this will lead to worse outcomes in education. In my view, nations should not force students to go through the same curriculum until college because people are different and it will lead to more burnout in teaching. Overall, it mainly talks about point 2, which is understandable. The conclusion is not the most important part, particularly if we have a ton of typos and if the logic in the rest of the essay is not very strong. I would say in general, the overall problems that we have here are, number 1, definitely the typos. Those are very fixable, so I recommended to definitely go that route first. The examples are quite vague. They are unclear how it represents the point. The logic there really needs to tie back to what you're trying to say. You can also make up examples of students who are really talented, for example, and really suffered from having a required education. Another mistake that this test taker made was that he did not really understand what the question was or what the point of the question was. The focus of the question is really on nations, and proximally it's about students. So the question is about whether a nation should require a national curriculum because that will affect students. Talking about teachers is really irrelevant unless you are very explicitly linking all of those things together and making sure that you're talking about a nation afterwards. That lack of explicit tying back is another one of the places where this essay could be improved. I think even if the logic is not that solid, if you are very explicit in how it ties back to your points, it makes a much stronger argument and it leaves a lot less for the reader to have to think about and have to do. Overall, I would say this grade is probably about a 3 in terms of the logic and reasoning. Because of all the typos, it might even drop down to a 2, simply because of how many typos there are. But in general, this test taker has some good ideas and some really common mistakes that a lot of people make. This question was also a relatively difficult question, so that is a lot of tremendous progress. I will link to this essay and some of my comments down in this description box down below, so make sure to click on that if you're interested, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and it was helpful. I look forward to talking to you or tutoring you if you are interested in that. If not, I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!